Naledi was 27 and tired down to her bone. For 3 years she'd worked double shifts at the hospital, saving every extra rand she could. When she finally got the keys to her own apartment in Johannesburg, she cried in the empty living room. It wasn't big, but it was hers. Every tile, every window, every piece of peace she'd bought with sleepless nights. For the first time, she didn't have to share a room, lower her voice, or ask permission. She could breathe. One sunny afternoon, her mother, Mathembai, and her older sister, Cool, came to visit. Cool was 6 months pregnant and kept rubbing her belly, sighing about how cramped her place was. Naledi smiled and served them tea, proud to show off her new home. The fresh paint, the curtains she'd chosen herself, the tiny balcony that caught the sunset just right. Over dinner, the mood shifted. Her mother glanced around the apartment and said, almost too casually, "Naledi, your sister needs space. You're single. Let her stay here for a while." Naledi froze, a spoon halfway to her mouth. Then she laughed softly, thinking her mother was joking. "Stay here? Ma, you're serious?" But her mother wasn't smiling. Cool just stared at her plate, saying nothing. The room suddenly felt smaller. Naledi's heart sank. This apartment was supposed to be her reward, her peace after years of struggle. But in one sentence, that peace started to slip away. A week later, Naledi came home after another long double shift. Her feet ached, her scrubs smelled like antiseptic, and all she wanted was a shower and her bed. But when she unlocked the door, she froze. There were boxes everywhere, baby clothes, kitchen items, even Cool's big pink suitcase sitting by the couch. Cool appeared from the bedroom, looking nervous. "Hey," she said softly, not meeting Naledi's eyes. "What's going on?" Naledi asked, her voice tired but sharp. Cool shifted from foot to foot. "Mom said you'd understand. She told me to move in, just until the baby comes." Naledi blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. "Cool, you didn't even ask me?" "I wanted to," her sister mumbled. "But Mom said it's your duty to help family. You've got space, and..." Her voice trailed off. Naledi felt her chest tighten. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, crowded with boxes and the weight of other people's choices. She walked into her bedroom, her sanctuary, and found Cool's bag already on the chair. She stepped outside, phone in hand, and called her mother. When Mathembai answered, her tone was cold, not like the mother Naledi knew. "Ma, what's happening? You told Cool she could move in without even asking me." Naledi asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're ungrateful," her mother snapped. "Your sister is carrying life, and you're hoarding space like a parasite." Naledi's heart dropped. "A parasite?" she whispered, her throat closing up. "Yes," Mathembai continued. "You live alone in that big apartment while your sister struggles. You should be ashamed." Naledi couldn't speak. The line went silent except for her mother's heavy breathing. She hung up slowly and stared at her phone, her hands shaking. She stood there for a long time, the word echoing in her head, parasite. That single word cut deeper than anything else. This was the same woman who used to tell her, "Work hard, my child. Build something for yourself." Now she was the one tearing it down. Tears welled in Naledi's eyes, but she wasn't angry, just stunned. All those years of night shifts, of skipping meals, of working through exhaustion just to have a place she could finally call home. And it was dismissed like it meant nothing. Inside, she could hear Cool moving around, humming softly as she unpacked. The sound felt like a stranger invading her silence. Naledi leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her mother's words looped in her head. "You're hoarding space like a parasite." For the first time, she wondered if hard work would ever be enough, or if family could still break you in ways no stranger ever could. It was just after sunrise when Naledi finally got home. She'd been on her feet for 12 hours, her eyes heavy and her body running on coffee and habit. All she could think about was a hot shower and her bed. The streets were quiet, the kind of calm that usually made her feel safe. But when she reached her apartment door and tried her keys, they didn't turn. She frowned, tried again. Nothing. She jiggled the handle, confused. Maybe the lock was jammed. Then she knocked softly. After a few seconds, the door opened just a little, and Cool appeared in her pajamas, holding her belly with one hand. "Cool, what's wrong with the lock?" Naledi asked, forcing a tired smile. Cool looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom said you should stay at Aunt Lindy's until I have the baby." Naledi blinked, thinking she'd misheard. "What?" Cool sighed. "It's just for a while, okay? Mom said you'd understand." Naledi felt her stomach twist. "Cool," she said slowly, her voice shaking. "This is my home. I paid every cent. You can't just..." But before she could finish, Cool closed the door. For a moment, Naledi just stood there, staring at the closed door in disbelief. She could hear movement inside, the sound of the TV, her sister's footsteps. All in the home she had fought for, the one she'd dreamed about on every long, lonely night at the hospital. She knocked again, harder this time. "Cool, open the door. Please." Silence. Naledi's hands trembled. Her keys dangled uselessly in her grasp. Slowly, she backed away, realizing it was over, at least for now. When she turned around, she noticed a few neighbors watching from their balconies. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The pity in their eyes said enough. A grown woman, locked out of her own home. Naledi stood there in her wrinkled nurse's uniform, the morning breeze cold against her skin. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The exhaustion hit all at once, the kind that starts in your bones. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and walked down the street with her head low. Her phone buzzed with messages from work, from friends, but she ignored them all. She just kept walking until she found a small, cheap motel a few blocks away. The room smelled like damp carpet and cigarette smoke, but it had a bed, and that was enough. She sat on the edge, still in her uniform, staring at the wall. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She worked so hard for peace, and now she had nowhere to belong. That night, for the first time in years, Naledi didn't cry because she was tired. She cried because she finally understood. Sometimes the people you'd give everything to are the ones who take everything away. The days after being locked out felt like a blur. Naledi stayed at the small motel near the hospital, barely eating, barely sleeping. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and stare at the ceiling, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Her chest felt heavy all the time, like she was carrying shame that didn't even belong to her. Her phone buzzed constantly, missed calls from her mother, a few messages from coworkers asking if she was okay. She ignored them all. Every time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The girl who once worked double shifts with pride now looked empty. She felt like the unwanted daughter, the one who did everything right and still wasn't enough. One evening, she sat on the edge of the motel bed scrolling aimlessly through her old messages, trying to distract herself. And then she saw a chat from years ago, her late father's number. He had died when she was in nursing school, but she had never deleted their messages. Her hands shook as she opened it. The last thing he ever texted her read, "Never let anyone make you small for loving yourself." She read it again. And again, something in her broke, but in a good way this time. It wasn't sadness. It was like she finally remembered who she was. Her father had believed in her, even when no one else did. She thought about all those nights he'd pick her up after a long shift, telling her, "One day, you'll live soft because you worked hard." Naledi wiped her tears with the back of her hand. She looked out the motel window at the city lights and whispered to herself, "No more begging for love." The next morning, she woke up early, showered, and put on her best clothes. Not the tired nurse uniform, a crisp blouse, jeans, and confidence she hadn't felt in weeks. She called her friend Tabo, a lawyer she'd gone to university with. When they met for coffee, Naledi laid everything on the table, the apartment papers, the receipts, the messages. Tabo flipped through the documents carefully, then looked up at her and smiled. "Naledi," he said, "they can't kick you out of what's legally yours." She blinked, still unsure if she should believe it. "So, what do I do?" Tabo leaned back, his tone firm but kind. "You stand up for yourself. You've got the law on your side, and this time you're not fighting alone." For the first time in weeks, Naledi smiled. A small one, but real. The pain was still there, but it was starting to turn into something else. Power. She wasn't just going to survive this. She was about to teach them what happens when the quiet one finally stops being quiet. A week later, Naledi stood in front of her apartment again, this time not as a helpless daughter, but as the owner. The morning air was cool, and she could feel her heartbeat in her chest. Beside her were two uniformed officers and her friend Tabo, holding the eviction notice. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't back down. This was the moment she had been building up to since the night she cried herself to sleep in that cheap motel room. When the officers knocked, Cool opened the door. Her face went pale the second she saw them. Boxes were still stacked in the hallway, and baby things were scattered around. "Naledi, what's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking. Naledi stepped forward, calm but firm. "I'm here to take back my home." Cool's eyes filled with panic. "Naledi, please. I'm pregnant. You can't do this to me." Naledi's voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. "You didn't think about that when you locked me out of my own apartment." For a second, silence filled the room. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps, Mothembai. She stormed down the hallway, her face twisted with anger. "So this is what you've become," she shouted. "You'd rather throw out your own sister than share? You've turned cold." Naledi turned to her mother, her eyes steady. "You didn't want to share love, Ma. You wanted control." Her mother blinked, caught off guard. For once, Naledi didn't shrink under her voice. The officers stepped forward and handed Cool the official papers. One of them said, politely but firmly, "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." Cool started to cry, sitting down on the couch with her hands on her belly. "I can't believe you're doing this, Naledi," she whispered. "You're my sister." Naledi's chest tightened, but she didn't break. "I am your sister," she said quietly. "And that's why I'm doing this the right way, not the cruel way." Mothembai grabbed her bag and shook her head, muttering under her breath. "Heartless. That's what you've become. a heartless girl who forgot where she came from. Naledi just sighed. Her voice was soft, almost tired. Heartless people always call you cold when you stop letting them burn you. For the first time, her mother had no reply. As Naledi turned to leave, she glanced around the apartment, her apartment. The place that once felt stolen now felt like it was coming back to her. The sunlight hit the living room just right, and she smiled faintly. She didn't feel cruel. She felt free. Outside, Tabo patted her shoulder. "You did what you had to do," he said. Naledi nodded, finally exhaling the breath she'd been holding for weeks. "No," she said quietly. "I did what I should have done from the start. I chose myself." 48 hours later, Naledi stood at her door again, holding a new set of keys. The officers had done their job, and Cool had moved out with her things. The hallway was quiet. For a long moment, Naledi just stood there, staring at the door before unlocking it. Inside, the apartment looked half empty. Boxes gone, baby clothes gone, but the air still carried traces of tension. She walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the counters, the sofa she once slept on after long shifts. It felt strange, like walking through both a victory and a loss at the same time. When the locksmith finished changing the locks, he handed her the keys and said kindly, "You're safe now." Safe. The word made her eyes sting. That night, Naledi lit a candle and made herself a simple meal, rice and stew. She ate in silence, letting the quiet fill the space that had once been filled with shouting, judgment, and guilt. It felt heavy but peaceful. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to be alone. The next week, she booked her first therapy session. It felt strange at first, talking about her family to a stranger. But slowly, she started to open up. She talked about her mother's expectations, the way she always had to be the strong one, the guilt that came with saying no. Her therapist told her something that stuck. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors, and you get to choose who walks through them. Naledi left that session feeling lighter. Every week, she learned a little more about herself, how to rest without guilt, how to say no without explaining, how to love herself without needing permission. One night, she came home after work, took a hot shower, and lay down on her bed. No noise, no tension, just peace. She closed her eyes and fell asleep within minutes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she slept through the night. But peace came with a price. Word spread through the family that Naledi had humiliated Cool, that she had forgotten where she came from. At family gatherings, cousins whispered behind her back. Aunties shook their heads. Her mother refused to answer her calls. It hurt, of course it did. But Naledi didn't fight it. She stopped explaining herself to people who had already chosen their side. Instead, she poured her energy into healing, into her work, her therapy, her quiet mornings with coffee and sunlight. Some nights, she'd sit on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. For years, she had chased love and approval from her family, thinking it would make her whole. But now, in the silence of her own space, she finally understood something powerful. Peace doesn't always look like everyone clapping. Sometimes it just looks like being alone and okay with it. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. Naledi still went to work, still came home to her quiet apartment, still met her therapist once a week. The pain had softened, turning into something she could live with. She was healing, not fast but honestly. One rainy evening, she was sitting on her couch with a blanket and a cup of tea when her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months, Cool. Naledi froze. Her heart started to beat faster. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it, but something told her to answer. "Hello," she said quietly. There was silence on the other end. Then Cool's shaky voice came through. "Naledi, I had the baby." Naledi's breath caught. "Oh," she whispered, unsure what else to say. Cool sniffled. "She's healthy. It's a girl. I wanted you to know." Naledi swallowed hard. "I'm glad she's okay." There was another pause. Then Cool said, her voice trembling, "I'm sorry, Naledi. I shouldn't have listened to Mom. I thought she was helping me, but I see now she just wanted to control everything. I hurt you, and you didn't deserve that." Naledi sat back, the phone pressed against her ear. She could hear the baby cooing softly in the background. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The old pain was still there, the betrayal, the humiliation, but it felt distant now, like a wound that had already started to close. Finally, she asked softly, "Are you safe?" Cool hesitated, then said, "Yes. I'm staying with a friend for now. It's not perfect, but we're okay." Naledi nodded, even though her sister couldn't see it. "Good," she said, her voice calm and gentle. "Then that's all that matters." On the other end, Cool started to cry again, whispering thank yous through the tears. Naledi didn't cry this time. She just listened. Her chest ached, but it wasn't from anger. It was from love, the kind that refuses to die even when it's been bruised. When the call ended, Naledi sat there for a while, staring at the rain outside her window. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't mind. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't forget what happened, how they treated her, how alone she felt. But she forgave, not because they earned it, but because she was tired of carrying the weight. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about freeing herself from the story that kept her stuck. She looked out at the wet city lights and whispered to herself, "I forgive you, Cool. I forgive you, Ma. But this time I choose peace." And for the first time in months, she smiled, a real one, soft, small, and full of quiet strength. By the next year, Naledi's life looked completely different. She was still working as a nurse, but her spirit felt lighter, more grounded. Therapy had helped her rebuild her confidence, piece by piece. She'd learned that peace wasn't something people gave you, it was something you built for yourself. And that realization sparked an idea. One night, while scrolling online, Naledi came across a post from a young woman saying she had nowhere to go after being kicked out by her family. The words hit too close to home. Naledi remembered the motel room, the loneliness, the way it felt to have everything you worked for taken away. That night, she opened her laptop and started sketching out a plan, a simple idea that would soon grow into something powerful. She called it Home Care Africa, a small business helping young women find safe, affordable housing when family life became toxic or unsafe. She wanted to create what she didn't have back then, a lifeline. At first, it started small. She used her savings to rent out 2 apartments, helping women who needed temporary shelter. Then she partnered with a few property owners and social workers she knew through the hospital. Within months, the idea took off. Word spread on social media, and people began reaching out, not just for housing, but for advice, guidance, and hope. One evening, Naledi decided to share her own story online. She posted a picture of her apartment, now bright and cozy, and wrote, "They called me a parasite, but parasites take I built." She hit post and went to bed, not thinking much of it. The next morning, her phone was blowing up. Thousands of comments, messages, shares. Women from all over the country were telling their stories, how they'd been called selfish, ungrateful, or cold for setting boundaries. One woman wrote, "I left home to save my sanity. Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." Naledi sat in her kitchen, scrolling through the comments with tears in her eyes. She replied to one that caught her attention. The woman had written, "I feel guilty for choosing peace. Everyone says I abandoned my family." Naledi typed back, "We're not selfish for choosing peace. We're just finally choosing ourselves." That comment alone was shared thousands of times. News blogs picked up her story. Interviews followed. Suddenly, Naledi wasn't just the nurse who'd once been locked out of her own apartment. She was a voice for women learning to reclaim their lives. Still, she stayed humble. She didn't do it for fame. She did it because every time she helped someone find a home, it felt like she was healing a younger version of herself. Late one night, as she looked out at the Johannesburg skyline, Naledi smiled to herself. She had turned her pain into purpose, and this time, no one could take that away. A year later, life had settled into a quiet, steady rhythm for Naledi. Her business was growing, her nursing job was stable, and most importantly, she was at peace. She no longer woke up feeling anxious about what her family thought of her. But one afternoon, she got a message from her cousin. "Mom's planning a family reunion next weekend. Everyone's coming, even Cool. You should too." Naledi stared at the message for a long time. Her first instinct was to say no. The thought of being around her mother again made her chest tighten. There were still scars, invisible but real. She didn't want to reopen old wounds. Still, something inside her whispered that maybe it was time. Time to face it, not with anger, but with the peace she'd worked so hard to find. So the next Saturday, Naledi got dressed in a simple floral dress and drove to her childhood neighborhood. The closer she got, the faster her heart beat. When she parked outside the house, she could already hear laughter and music. The moment she stepped inside, the room went quiet for a second. Then everyone started greeting her, smiles, hugs, warm words. But this time, the energy felt different. There was no pity, no judgment, just respect. People had seen what she'd done with her life. They'd seen her story online. Some of her cousins even whispered, "That's her, the one who started Home Care Africa." Then she saw Cool. She was sitting on the couch, holding a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. When she looked up and saw Naledi, her face lit up. She stood and walked over, the baby cradled in her arms. "Hey," Cool said softly. "Hey," Naledi replied, smiling nervously. Cool looked down at the baby and then back at her sister. "I want you to meet someone," she said. "This is Naledi Jr." Naledi froze. "What?" Cool nodded, eyes shining. "I named her after the strongest woman I know." Tears filled Naledi's eyes before she could stop them. She reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. "She's beautiful," she whispered. At that moment, their mother appeared from the kitchen. For a second, she just stood there, watching them. Then she walked over slowly, her face softer than Naledi had seen in years. Her voice cracked a little as she said, "I was wrong, my child." Naledi looked at her mother, her eyes glistening with emotion. She could see the regret there, the kind that comes too late but still matters. She stepped forward and hugged her gently. "I know, Mama," she said quietly. "We all learn late sometime." The three of them stood there, mother, daughter, and baby, in a silence that felt like forgiveness. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the past. But for the first time, it felt like love was finally finding its way back home. The evening light spilled softly through the windows of Naladi's apartment. The space looked completely different now. Bright curtains, soft colors, a few plants on the balcony, and framed photos of people she'd helped through Home Care Africa. The apartment no longer carried the weight of old memories. It felt alive again, filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet peace she had fought so hard to earn. She walked slowly through each room, her fingertips brushing against the furniture she'd picked out herself. Every detail told a story, of healing, of boundaries, of learning to love herself without guilt. In the reflection of the window, she caught her own eyes and smiled. In that moment, her father's old words echoed in her heart. "Never let anyone make you small for loving yourself." A calm voice filled her thoughts, the kind that came from deep understanding. "They called me a parasite for protecting what I earned. But I wasn't feeding off anyone. I was finally feeding myself." She looked out at the Johannesburg skyline, the city lights flickering like tiny promises. For a long time, she'd believed peace meant being accepted. Now she knew better. Peace was coming home to yourself and feeling safe there. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Sometimes the best revenge isn't anger. It's a quiet home, peace, and knowing you never needed their approval. Naladi stood there, her reflection glowing softly in the glass, surrounded by the life she built from heartbreak. She wasn't the unwanted daughter anymore. She was the woman who chose herself. And that choice, she knew, would always be enough.